How to read and summarize a scientific paper. This is some personal advices and suggestions for you for how to do it. And be aware that not all teachers necessarily have the same opinion as I have. So, how to read and summarize a scientific paper? And what's the difference between those papers and a textbook? Well, a scientific paper is more difficult to read because it's written by specialists for other specialists and often on a rather specific topic. So, why are we not giving you a textbook? Well, because we actually can't find a suitable one that covers all the topics that we have in this course and that is not too old or is not made for people at your level. And also remember that when you are doing your university degree, you also are supposed to read and be able to read scientific literature and to analyze it. So this is what we do also here. Is it difficult? Yes, it is. Scientific papers, as I just said, are written for specialists and other specialists who actually think that we know the same as they know. But then this is often difficult to understand if you don't know all the same things as they do. There are two versions. One is called primary literature, that is supposed to represent the most and recent scientific insight. This is also what we call research papers. Then there's another type that's called review papers. They are often made to give an overview of a specific subject. This is often called state-of-the-art papers. And they will typically contain less technical details than the other ones, but are still rather difficult to understand. And then, on the other hand, a textbook is fundamentally different because it has actually been designed to provide an overview and do it in a way that most people, without knowing all the detail, should be able to follow it. But then, of course, it might sometimes be superficial, so it does not really go into the necessary details. So that's why we, in this course, we have primary literature as a main literature for you to read. And it is not so easy. So my best advice, if I should put it in just few words, is don't give up. But of course, if you practice, you'll quickly be better to it. And that's our idea with this course here, that we use the literature all the way through, and therefore you will get training in using it, and you will be better and better. And just remember that it is something that is part of your university degree, and you will have to use it when you do your master project, your PhD, or in a job. So being able to read papers is really important to do. So let's start to look at how a scientific paper is structured. They are mostly in the same way as the one you see here. This is just a funny example, of course, but it contains an abstract, which is a short resume of the whole paper, then an introduction, what it's about, what has been done in previously, and so on. And then we have the methods, the results, discussion, and finally references. Let's take a look at each of the items in it and how you read it. First, read the abstract, because the abstract should give you an overview and tell you what the author thinks is most relevant here. So you could maybe take your yellow pen and highlight some of the keywords that you think is important when you read it and think these are important. Then the next thing, read the introduction. This is important part of the paper as well, because here they explain what has been done in before they did their study, and also what is the purpose and the hypothesis for the present study. And this is quite important because the purpose, why did they do it, is important to know. And the hypothesis is actually the intellectual thinking that's behind the study that you're going to read. Then the next thing is actually to skim all the figures and even the tables, because if you do that, that should also give you a good feeling of what the paper is about. And if you meet something in the figures and tables that you think, wow, this sounds strange, I don't understand what that means, even not if I read the legend to the figures and the table, then make a note. And then I would suggest to take a break and maybe think a little bit about the paper. Then the next thing, of course, is to read the rest of the paper. So you'll have to look into the results section, and of course also the methods. How have they done that? This is sometimes hard to read, especially the methods. And if you are stuck with something like, let's say, a technique that you have never heard about before, then don't do anything. Just make a note for yourself. Well, I have maybe to look up what this and this means, and you can do that later on. And then continue and also read the results. And then when you have read the results and the discussion and maybe made some highlighted some keywords, then you can start to summarize the paper for yourself, either on your phone or on your tablet or just on a piece of paper, and write down maybe in few words what are the main questions that the authors have asked, what was the hypothesis, which type of methods did they use in field and lab, what was the main results, what did they contain, and then what did they conclude from the results. So this is just keywords that you write down for yourself, and they're nice to have later on, because if you want to reuse this paper, maybe for example for your essay in this course, then you don't have to read it all over again, but just can go back to your notes and say, oh yeah, this paper is actually something that I can use for this. Then here's some other suggestion that might help you to continue with your paper, because now it's the time where you should put it into a wider perspective. So you could put up some questions for yourself like those in red here. So why is this topic generally interesting? It might even not be so interesting, and that is actually interesting for yourself to know if it's not a relevant paper. Why is it important for science? This often means what have we learned from it? And for whom is the finding relevant? Is it for scientists? Is it for managers? Is it for politicians? Is it for NGO? Or who actually would be interested in the findings? Could it be used for anything applied, which means can we create a new method, or can we grow new crops, or would there be any applied aspects? And then two maybe important things. What are the weakest parts in the paper? And what are the strongest parts? You could, for example, write 3 weak and 3 strong ones. And this is actually a good way to get an idea of this paper actually has moved something. So if you, for example, have like the methods are really, really old and not used anymore, the statistics are poor, and I could not really understand the figures, well, then it's not a good paper. Well, so maybe you will also be able to put up some of the strongest parts in. So this is, ooh, this was really something that made me thinking, or seems like something that is really useful for science. And we can actually put all this down to some very few points for what to do when you read a paper. Ask what is about, why has it been made, how has it been made, what came out of it, and what can it be used for. There's another thing we can also put into this, and that is what other people think about this paper. Other people here means other scientists. And we can look at something that is easy for you to find. We will look for the so-called impact factor and also who have cited the paper. So you can do that, for example, by going to Google Scholar or Web of Science, and then you can check out what is the impact factor for the journal. The higher the number, the better. It starts from 0, and some of the most high-ranked papers are 25 in impact factor. The ones we are typically having here for the course is maybe having impact factor from 2 to 15 maybe. Then you can also look at how many times a paper has been cited by other scientists with or without themselves. And you can also look at the patterns of the citations. Let's take a look at an example. This is just one of my own. So here's a paper about the ecological implication of some cyanobacteria toxins in aquatic food webs. And it has been cited quite a number of times. You can see up here it has been cited 257 times since it was published, and it was published in 96. And you can see here from the figure below that it is not published equally in all years. There are many reasons for that. And typically a paper will be cited most intensively in the beginning, and then it maybe levels off. But some high impact papers will actually be cited throughout maybe a scientist's whole career. This is probably one of them, because this is a sort of review paper that tells a lot about what these cyanobacterial toxins can do in food webs. And this is something that many other people working with this subject will like to refer to. Then there's another example below. This is a paper about what happens with food Daphnia have been eating. So food evacuation means how they get rid of the food from the stomach. And this paper is cited 4 times, and it's also very old. It's from 1988. So not many people have really been interested in that paper. This is, of course, also something quite special, because who is actually interested in the how Daphnia make poos? Because this is what it's about. And about the citation factor, the the last one here is in a paper that is not having a really high scientific impact factor scientifically. It's I think the impact factor at that time was 1.5, and the other one with the cyanobacterial toxins is not having actually a higher impact factor. I think it's nowadays it's around 2, so it has changed between 1.5 and 2. So none of them are quite high ranked, but still the first one has been cited a lot, so of course people want to use it. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is presenting a paper or a scientific subject, because this is also what we will ask you to do here, and it also takes some training. So if we have a paper like the one we had before, so what do we actually do when we want to present it? Well, I think there are 2 important things to remember. So who are you presenting for, and what is their background? And also to know the subject well and to believe in it yourself, because if you don't believe in what you're saying, it's hard for others to believe what you say. Okay, so what is in it when you want to present a paper? Well, you have to extract the essential information. You have to figure out how to tell the story. You need to focus on the strong and maybe the weak elements. So focus on those things. You need to be critical. You need to illustrate, but not to have too much illustrations. Keep it simple, because otherwise it takes all the focus. And of course, finally, to conclude. So here are some questions that you can ask yourself, and also use them for a stepping stone for creating a good discussion, if that's what you're going to do. So are the hypotheses sound and relevant? What's the background for putting them up? What have the scientists had as a background? And how have they actually proved or disproved it in the paper? What about the data? Is the data reliable? Are the methods suitable? And have it been made into a convincing story? If not, what could have made it better? Are important aspects missing in the study as you see it? Why did the authors not include it, do you think? Can we understand and trust the analysis, the statistics, and everything else in the paper? Is it convincingly made? Are their conclusions valid? And what impact does it have for other researchers? Do you think this paper is going to be influential or not? And try to ask why and why not. And when you want to present for a broader audience, the art of telling a story that keeps the listener focused is not so easy, but there are things to remember. Try to do this little exercise. Imagine that you have made this scientific discovery, that the global carbon balance is incorrect because enormous amounts of ancient carbon is buried in sediments of Arctic lakes that used to be ice covered for 10 months, but now is only ice covered for 8 months. Try to discuss with yourself, or even better with a person next to you, how you would present this to a mixed audience of scientists, policymakers, and reporters, in a way that they really understood the message that you're giving them. And then a few words about what is a good story. Well, if you ask a journalist who writes hundreds of stories every year, would say, forget about all the details, numbers and technicalities, but let me know what is really important. And that will be, why did you do it? And what are the consequences? The first, because your motivation must have been strong enough to do this study. So you could have done it because of belief, for money, or just for science, but the reasons for why you did it is important for others to know. And the latter, the consequences, actually means, will this discovery have any fatal implications for people, wildlife, economy, human being, the world, etc.? So what will it imply? So this is end of my story. I wish you good luck with your reading and your presentations. And remember, we can also help you if you have any questions.